Hello, everybody from the Ronin community. I'm very happy to share this presentation with you and to do so with Yogi. Today we did some joint presentations and there are some connections between the two presentations today. So I'll be talking about an analysis I did of the UN agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm pointing to some constructive ways forward to a social ecological justice. So first we need to know a little bit where we are, which is the Anthropocene, as you know, the era in which we unfortunately left behind us this very stable Holocene in which life thrived so easily and in a fascinating, mysterious way. And now we are finding us with the following challenges. One, that humans have developed the power to both disturb but also influence evolution. It's in the grip of a pathological path dependence. Path dependence is that forced connection between the big powers of the world, like big governments, corporate life, the markets, citizens, and pathological path dependence is when that all believes in the possibility of infinite growth on a finite planet, for instance, and that continued insistence on economic growth. In any case, the power that we now have places us for an ethical dilemma. Will we use the power to further destroy the biosphere, the ecology, the climate, or can we use that power? Are we going to use it to play a more constructive way and to rebalance things? So challenges are indeed climate change, pollution of planet Earth and space itself. Opportunities, rethink our position to the web of life. That's very much systems thinking. Asking deeper questions as to who are we, why are we here, how do we connect to the world, to other species, rethinking life in terms of its meaningfulness and open the road towards a social ecological justice. So what I've performed is a critical discourse analysis. That is my academic field, which I've been working on for the last 25 years. I did a PhD on it, which I completed in 2008. So what it does is investigating real and historical discourses in the context in which they emerge. A discourse is an organized perspective on reality or on aspects of discourses. So you can have the discourse of the church, the discourse of the United Nations, the discourse of a school or the educational field. And they all represent the world in a particular way that suits that particular perspective. Discourses also hold norms as to what counts as valid or not valid. Science does, for instance, too. What counts as good, what counts as bad. Social structures and discourses are mutually constitutive, as we will see also in this presentation. A critical discursive analysis helps reveal hidden ideologies and power relations. There is negative power such as repression, but also positive power of emancipation, changing different directions, as Foucault also had it, for instance, and discourse analysis is deeply influenced by Foucault. A CDA, critical discourse analysis, opens room for agency, social change, making different choices. It's very rich in language, metaphors, arguments, and to me, it has given me a tool to analyze many topics from social movements to social entrepreneurship. And I did also research in a practical participatory action research in 4 primary schools on social justice. And this brings us to Praxis and to current work that I'm doing, and which I'll tell more of in the end. So discourses have a series of features. They can be inclusive and exclusive. They're often, the more managerial discourses become, the more they reduce complexity to the simplicity of Excel planning sheets, so to say. Or they can be more complex. They can include, like in our case, often include and foreground human species and exclude other species, foreground white people above people from different ethnic compositions. There is always including boys and men above women or vice versa. All of those things are happening in discourse. And discourses can be detached and nominalized, or attached, organic, and embodied, a difference I wrote in detail about in a publication of 2016, Why Complexity Matters. And the reason is that the detached discourses, as we'll see also in this presentation, avoid all the complexities of real life. Often they're even not referring anymore to real life situations. Discourses legitimate perspectives. A famous example is Margaret Thatcher. There is no alternative to globalization and the liberation of the market. Unlimited growth is possible on a finite planet is a persistent belief. And these kind of mantras stop us from thinking critically. It stops us from imagining alternatives. It forces us to take political suggestions as facts. And it makes us believe that social reality, with all its injustices, is inevitable as it is. Discourses also frame perspectives, and I give the example from climate crisis as a metaphor that helps frame both problems and solutions. Climate crisis as a term implies that the problem is out there and as an object which can be fixed by humans, by us as a subject. Such a metaphor ignores the complexity of a climate which is beyond any human knowledge and control. It also ignores the complexity of our relation to the living world. And neglects, therefore, a profound analysis which might lead to understanding that we are actually more part of the problem before we start thinking about solutions. So this is the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals, which I analyzed. It was set up in 2015 when the UN celebrated its 70th anniversary. It provides an agenda with 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with its icons and the website. To address the problems that are a challenge to sustainable development. It provides a platform for citizens and agents around the world to participate and to find information, which is a good thing about it. It can connect people. And in the following slides, I'll show you some issues that I found in the analysis. So it starts with a preamble. There will be no peace without sustainable development, and there will be no sustainable development without peace. That is one example of the singularization and the taken for granted that I talked to about before. Then all countries and all stakeholders acting in collaborative partnership will implement this plan. So there is a universal setting of an agenda which will be universally followed by the entire world community, thus ignoring the complexity of cultural differences, people being in different countries affected and in different areas affected much more by the consequences of climate change at the moment than others. None of that is being described, as we will or taken into mind in the agenda, as we will see later. So what I do observe as challenges are economic challenges, inequality, unemployment, socially, health, terrorism, migration, and environmental desertification and loss of diversity. These three are also considered the three pillars on which the agenda rests and which it has taken from the earlier Brundtland report, which rested on the same three pillars. So to explain a bit how this works is the deictic analysis that I've performed or based on the analysis. Deixis is actually how a text refers to the real outside world, to the actual context. There is a deictic center, which are the people, the speakers in the here and now. So that was in this case the UN meeting. And the agenda then, so here I explain what the concepts are. The temporal deixis is temporal references in relation to the context. For that, they use the time span scale of the UN origins and the end of the SDG agenda. So the whole time history in this report runs from 1945 till 2030, the end date of the SDG agenda. Its spatial deixis refers to spaces which in the agenda refers only to the milestones within the UN. So its origins in 1945, the famous meeting in Rio for Ecology and other similar meetings. And then personal deixis refers to the people to whom the text is addressed. They may be explicit or implicit. In this case, citizens, academics, governments, families, the world populations, and they are assumed to assign and execute the agenda. So this was the formal relations to deixis of the world leaders who created the agenda. In the publication I contrasted this with two salient voices in COP26 conference in Glasgow. The Prime Minister of Barbados, actually one of the world leaders that were that were of course part of the leaders who made the agenda, and an Amazon ecological activist. And it shows very well how deixis these can differ from speaker to speaker. So in the case of the Prime Minister of Barbados, her temporal deixis emphasized the commitments of the world leaders. So especially the Paris agreements made in Paris in 2015. Its spatial deixis became more varied. She emphasized the difference between the richest countries as opposed to vulnerable coastal areas, of which Barbados is, of course, one. The small island. Then personal deixis, she made again a split between rich leaders, the leaders of the rich countries, and the leaders and citizens of poor countries and the islands, who actually also affect much more the effects and the risks of climate change as it is for their survival. So if the agenda was always we, the heads of state versus the people, she actually makes a difference, emphasizes a distinction within these heads of states, and urges in her speech the people from the leaders from rich states to do much more and to look after their financial commitments made in Paris. Then I also introduced the voice of an Amazon activist, ecological activist from the Amazons, who was also speaking up in the COP26 in Glasgow. And for her, deixis was way much longer than for the UN, 6,000 years, referring back to the long history of her family and her people living in the Amazon. Then there is the Amazon spatial deixis, referred not to the paper reality of the UN, but to the actual Amazon jungle, the earth and the rivers. And personal deixis refer to the people she learned from, who carried her culture, her history. My father, the great chief Almir Surri, and then also as agents appeared, the stars, the moon, the wind, to whom we have to listen, and who are actually telling us we are too late, we are drying up. My friend, and then she raises the voice of her friend, an activist who got killed during his activism, while world leaders remain absent. So people who are active to actually save the climate are frequently killed and under threat, and world leaders don't do anything to change that situation, or do way too little to change that situation. Well, encountered issues, I'll go quickly through this slide, but the UN agenda is still the best tool we have. It's worldwide acknowledged, so we still have 7 years to go and should make the best of it. But it's disconnected, contradictory in its aims. To achieve some, and even most of them, we still have to exploit more resources. It has quantitative rather than qualitative targets. And sustainable development, as we've seen, is a taken for granted, and that's actually a hidden way for a continuation of the current economy as we know it, but hopefully with doing away with the symptoms of it. And then the particular features, I've just shown them, anthropocentric and really brought away from actual context, removed from actual context. So it's an example of a disembodied, unattached discourse. Now, to look up more, I think, more fruitful discourses for the ways ahead of us in the situation that we are in, it's productive to make a distinction between a shallow ecology and a deep ecology. And for that, I draw on Naas, a Norwegian biologist, philosopher. So a shallow ecology is marked by a continued belief in the world as a machine Newtonian metaphor, which looks at the world and the universe as a machine. A continued belief in the man as the master of the universe metaphor, still also very dominant in modern science. Emphasis on biotechnology as a solution. Isolated short-term solutions, like we have seen that the SDGs are also presented like that as individual icons. Focused on goals rather than effects. Deep ecology uses the metaphor of a web of life, emphasizing the interconnectedness of life, rooted in nature, long-term systemic and complex solutions, and it integrates 12 principles, which I'm unable to present here, but working with principles has the advantage of not setting strict rules and regulations, but working from shared principles, which often also entail a notion of ethics. An awareness of the complexity of the biosphere and its balances, and it looks at bioregionalism and other items which are highly useful, but which I cannot explain right now. Then there is also a deep ecology movement, which acknowledges the intrinsic value of non-human species, independent of their practical use to us and their own right to live and their own dignity. A commitment to maintaining biodiversity. It includes a holistic relational vision of the world, organisms as nodes in the field of intrinsic relations, and so are humans also organisms as nodes in the field of nodes, actually in the field of intrinsic relations together with other species and living organisms. There is biospherical egalitarianism, so humans are not standing above other species in principle, and those who adhere to the movement should participate in the attempt to implement necessary changes. And that brings us to the notion of praxis. And praxis is an experienced, embodied way of learning in real contexts. Concept was developed by Plato and Aristotle, adopted by Bacon, Kant, Marx, and then from Marx to critical scientists such as Paulo Freire in education and Antonio Gramsci, who it brings theory and philosophy into lived experience by performing empirical research, engaging in dialogue, questioning the status quo in terms of whether it's socially just or not, if it's ecological just or not. And CDA, critical discourse analysis, and critical participatory action research, which are both like so much, are forms of research as a praxis, and with that aim also to change things for the better towards more justice if needed. So I think what we need to do to make the SDGs bend them into a happier possibilities is to look at them in our own contexts and add qualitative to these mostly quantitative targets, make a balance between abstract and embodied knowledge rooted in real life. Abstract knowledge is of course also very useful, but it shouldn't be, they should complement each other, these two kinds of knowledge. It requires critical citizenship and critical language awareness to maintain civil control, facilitate civil discussion, questioning, and argumentation. I also have a chapter written on that. And it requires questioning the status quo in the light of rethinking dominant practices and beliefs, and the implications for our ontological and epistemological understandings. And for this, I recommend very much systems thinking and the work from the Santiago School of Cognition, represented by Maturana and Varela. And a balance between a deep and a shallow ecology, and it requires reintroducing complexity and ethics into policy making. So to get there, we need an emphasis on ethics in policy, school curricula of professional training, and precisely when education as a knowledge-based economy fell under the grip of the free market economy, ethics was out of place. The free market became dominant. The free markets don't think in terms of ethics, they think in terms of efficiency, which often is at the expense of people and the ecology and other species and biodiversity. So we need more balance, as I said, embrace complexity, make sure that policy making is happening rooted in concrete reality, concrete ecological systems, and operates within the potential of the ecological system, and introduce eco-literacy in all curricula. It has been developed in California. It can be repeated elsewhere. And so I have a publication about these things. And this slide, I can't explain it all because there isn't so much time, but it brings together critical discourse analysis, critical participatory action research, and practice, that learning in theory. So that brings theory into lived experience. It creates an opportunity not for just learning as reproducing, but an opportunity for dialogue and deliberation. And it brings theory and history together in formative action. It makes actually every generation an agent in the history of human life also. For every generation has a task to strive for social justice and increasingly more ecological justice. And that is done through praxis. And I already explained what CDA and participatory action research are. I think they are strong tools. And I've just my last publication so far is an article on this in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia. And these are my references. This book can just be downloaded from there. This one, if you want to read it, you can send me a mail and I'll send it to you. And this was my presentation, and I wish to really thank you very much for your attention.